night had fallen over the frozen plains of late Ice Age North America. A small group of Clovis Paleo-Indians huddled close to a flickering fire, the only warmth and light amid the bitter cold. Their breath rose in clouds, mixing with the faint mist of volcanic ash drifting across the horizon. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the snow, moving with the wind, or perhaps something else. Unseen eyes watched them from the darkness beyond the firelight. A low, almost imperceptible rustle among snow-laden bushes hinted at a predator's presence. The ground bore fresh tracks, enormous paws pressed deep into the frost, telling of creatures far larger and more powerful than any human. Among them, the Smilodon, the saber-toothed cat, silent and patient, stalked, its keen gaze fixed on the warmth and life of the camp. The humans shifted uneasily, unaware of how close death prowled. Every snap of a twig, every hiss of the wind seemed amplified. In that frozen night, they were no longer the hunters. They were the hunted. The land stretched wide and unforgiving, dominated by ice and snow, a remnant of the Pleistocene Epoch that shaped the world over 11,000 years ago. Late Ice Age North America was a realm of extremes. Glaciers carved mountains, frozen rivers snaked through barren plains, and volcanic ash sometimes drifted silently across the horizon, toting the landscape in muted grey. In this frozen wilderness, survival was never guaranteed. Small bands of Clovis Paleo-Indians navigated this harsh world. Skilled hunter-gatherers, they moved in tight-knit groups, relying on stone-tipped spears, fire, and their knowledge of the land to survive. Shelters were rudimentary, crafted from wood, hides, and snow-packed earth, and every day required vigilance. Food had to be hunted or scavenged, water collected from icy streams, and warmth maintained at all costs. Their lives were measured by endurance, cooperation, and an unyielding awareness of danger. Yet humans were not alone. Towering mammoths and mastodons grazed across the plains, while giant ground sloths lumbered through forests, their immense size both awe-inspiring and a reminder of the raw power of nature. But these herbivores shared their world with apex predators far more lethal than any human. The Smilodon, with its saber-like fangs, prowled silently through snow and shadow. Packs of dire wolves stalked the plains, coordinating with uncanny intelligence, and short-faced bears, colossal and relentless, ruled the denser forests. In this frozen, ash-streaked landscape, humans were small, fragile, and exposed. Every step, every breath carried risk. They were not at the top of the food chain. They were a species teetering on the edge, hunted not only by the cold, but by creatures perfectly evolved to exploit it. Despite their skill and vigilance, the Clovis Paleo-Indians were far from safe. Snow-covered plains and dense forests concealed silent observers, predators whose very presence turned every step into a gamble. Near their camps, footprints marked the fresh snow tracks, too large, too deliberate to belong to any human. Smilodon had passed through. Its movements were calculated, silent, patient, leaving no clue until the hunter or gatherer was already within its deadly reach. Even the most experienced hunters were not immune. On several nights, small parties sent to trap mammoths or collect firewood failed to return. They vanished without a trace, leaving behind abandoned tools and overturned snow, evidence of struggle and the calculated efficiency of their pursuers. Within the tribe, tension simmered. Conversations around the fire grew quiet, eyes darting toward shadowed tree lines, and every rustle of snow or distant howl triggered anxiety. Fear spread like wildfire, not just for the lives of the missing, but for the very survival of the group. Smilodon was not a mindless predator. Ambush was its art. It stalked silently, using low snowbanks and fallen trees as cover, exploiting the tribe's predictable movements. Its massive canines were designed to pierce the throat or crush the skull, ending hunts quickly. But it was patient. It would watch, learn patterns, and strike with sudden, devastating force. Secondary threats compounded the danger. Dire wolves moved in coordinated packs, circling camps and hunting parties, exploiting confusion to isolate the weak. Short-faced bears, enormous and relentless, prowled the forests, capable of tearing through any shelter not reinforced with care. The humans' fires provided warmth, but also betrayed their location, flickering beacons in the cold, silent night. In this environment, survival was never guaranteed. The tribe learned quickly that that the Ice Age was not merely a struggle against weather or hunger, it was a fight against predators, perfectly adapted to a frozen, hostile world. Every decision, every movement, carried life or death consequences. The Clovis people were no longer just hunters, they had become prey, living on the knife's edge of extinction. The Clovis Paleo-Indians faced a relentless existence in the icy expanse of late Pleistocene North America. Each day was a precarious balance between hunger, exposure, and predation. Across the frozen plains and ash-strewn forests, Smilodon prowled silently, its muscular frame and saber-like canines perfectly adapted for ambush. The humans could sense it before they saw it, a subtle shift in the night air, tracks partially hidden in frost, and the eerie stillness that preceded the predator's approach. Dire wolves followed pack strategies that made them equally formidable, surrounding hunting parties, cutting off retreat, and exploiting every gap in human vigilance. Even the occasional short-faced bear, larger and more imposing than any human, loomed as a solitary threat that could destroy a camp in moments. Life for the Paleo-Indians was measured in vigilance and endurance. Camps had to be small, discreet, and mobile. Families huddled around fragile fires, flames barely cutting through the pervasive darkness and ash-laden wind. Frostbite crept over exposed skin, while the hungry clawed at frozen roots, and the occasional small animal foraging in near impossible conditions. Starvation was a constant shadow. A single lost hunter meant weeks of lost supplies, the weakening of communal morale, and the exposure of the most vulnerable members, children, the elderly, and the infirm. Psychological strain layered over physical hardship. Fear became as tangible as the snow and ice that covered every surface. Whispered warnings spread among the tribe whenever tracks were found near a sleeping area. Silent glances, tense postures, and hurried glances over shoulders became second nature. Every movement outside the temporary shelter was a gamble against predators whose senses and strategies had evolved over thousands of generations. The Paleo-Indians learned to recognize the difference between a wolf scent in fresh snow and the heavier, deliberate footprints of a Smilodon. Each discovery of tracks, each night of uneasy sleep, underscored that humans were not the apex predator in this land. Survival required constant adaptation, even if the full ingenuity of their strategies would only emerge later. Fire was essential, not just for warmth, but as a deterrent and a psychological anchor against the darkness. Camps were reinforced with ropes, branches, and snow walls, creating obstacles that slowed predators long enough for humans to escape. Food had to be rationed meticulously, with careful attention paid to melting snow for drinking water and preserving small catches of game. Every day was a careful negotiation with the environment itself. Sudden snowstorms could wipe out tracks, conceal predators, or force a hasty relocation. Frozen rivers posed hidden dangers, their surface appearing stable while currents underneath threatened to swallow those who misjudged their footing. Predators were ever-present teachers of caution. Smilodon's ambushes were rarely chaotic. They were precise and opportunistic. A lone hunter, straying too far from the group, might disappear silently, leaving only faint tracks and the echo of distant roars. Dire wolves adapted to human movement patterns, learning to wait near foraging grounds and shadow the tribe's pathways. Even short-faced bears, solitary and massive, exerted pressure by marking territory and challenging for scarce resources. These pressures shaped the tribe's movements, their rhythms, and their daily routines. Through this crucible, the humans persisted, but the struggle was relentless. Physical exhaustion, hunger, cold, and the constant threat of death forged a community defined by resilience and vigilance. Life was measured in survival, every day a test of endurance, every night a gamble against predators who had stalked the North American continent long before humans appeared. The Pleistocene was not a time for heroes in the traditional sense. It was a landscape where only those who could endure, adapt, and endure again would persist. By the time dawn broke over frozen plains, the survivors of the night's shadowed threats would emerge, exhausted but alive. Every member carried the weight of the tribe's fragile continuity, aware that the slightest misstep could tip the balance toward extinction. This relentless pressure, physical, mental, and environmental, would set the stage for the breaking point, where the limits of human endurance and the near-total threat from apex predators would push the tribe to the edge of survival. The Clovis Paleo-Indians teetered on the edge of catastrophe. Weeks of relentless exposure to the Pleistocene winter, starvation, and constant predation had taken their toll. Small bands that once moved with cautious confidence were now fragmented and wary, their numbers thinning as hunters failed to return and the weakest succumbed to cold or malnutrition. The threat of Smilodon, always precise in its ambush, loomed larger than ever, while dire wolves exploited every lapse in vigilance, circling camps and testing defenses. Even the enormous short-faced bears, solitary but powerful, contributed to the psychological pressure, their mere presence keeping humans on edge and disrupting essential foraging. Camps had become temporary refuges of precarious survival. Fires struggled against biting winds, snow-laden shelters often collapsing under heavy storms, and each foray for food risked exposure to predators. Children huddled with frostbitten fingers, elders weakened by illness, and hunters exhausted from tracking prey that grew scarcer with each passing day. Scarcity was not only a challenge of sustenance, it was a test of cohesion, as tribes were forced to prioritize who could be kept safe, who could accompany hunting parties, and how resources could be stretched to the limit. The psychological strain was as deadly as the physical. Constant fear, sleep deprivation, and the looming possibility of being hunted left the tribe tense, watchful, and at times paralyzed by indecision. Trust was tested, bonds strengthened by necessity, yet frayed by desperation. Every human instinct, flight, caution, defense was pushed to its limit. At this point, survival was no longer just a question of endurance. It was a question of ingenuity, of whether these humans could learn from the relentless pressures around them and transform vulnerability into advantage. The edge of extinction was not a distant threat. It was immediate, palpable, and inescapable. The landscape, predators, and elements had combined into a crucible that would determine whether the Clovis Paleo-Indians could continue, or whether humanity itself might falter in the icy grip of the Pleistocene. Faced with near extinction, the Clovis Paleo-Indians began to turn the tide through ingenuity and cooperation. Survival was no longer just about endurance, it required strategy, foresight, and adaptation to the harsh Pleistocene world that had so far pushed them to the brink. Shelters, once fragile and temporary, were reinforced with layers of wood, packed snow, and stone to withstand snowstorms and shield against prowling predators. Watch systems were established. Groups of hunters and elders took turns keeping vigil at night, scanning the darkness for the telltale movement of Smilodon or the glinting eyes of dire wolves. Coordination extended to hunting as well. Traps and pitfalls, carefully camouflaged in snow and ice, were employed to catch or slow megafauna and smaller predators, reducing direct confrontations. Spears and other stone-tipped weapons were crafted with greater precision, their designs reflecting lessons learned from failed hunts and near-fatal encounters. Fire became more than a source of warmth. It was a tool of defense and communication, signals flickering across frozen plains to alert others of danger or success. Knowledge sharing became central to survival. Elders and experienced hunters taught the next generation not only how to build shelters, craft tools, and manage fire, but also how to read tracks in snow, anticipate predator behavior, and ration resources effectively. This transfer of practical expertise ensured that survival skills were preserved, amplified, and passed down, transforming small bands of humans into more resilient communities. Through these adaptations, humans subtly gained the upper hand. Predators were no longer absolute masters of the landscape. Their advantage was mitigated by human ingenuity, vigilance, and collective effort. While danger remained ever present, the Clovis Paleo-Indians carved out a fragile yet sustainable existence. Their ability to learn, teach, and innovate ensured that they would endure, demonstrating the remarkable evolutionary adaptability that allowed humans to survive in a world dominated by beasts and extremes. As the ice and ash settled over the plains, the Clovis Paleo-Indians emerged from the shadow of relentless predation. Their numbers diminished, but their will unbroken. The world around them remained unforgiving snowstorms, frozen rivers, and and the lingering threat of apex predators ensured that vulnerability was never far away. Yet, through cooperation, ingenuity, and sheer determination, these early humans had carved out a fragile survival. Their reinforced shelters, disciplined watch systems, and coordinated hunting were not just strategies, they were lifelines, lessons etched into the collective memory of a people who refused to be erased. In these moments of endurance, broader truths emerge. The ability to share knowledge, to anticipate danger, and to adapt in the face of relentless threat laid the foundation for what we now recognize as human resilience. These early adaptations shaped the evolutionary trajectory of our species, demonstrating that survival in a world dominated by giants required both courage and intelligence. It was not brute strength alone that kept humans alive. It was foresight, learning, and the willingness to act together against forces far larger and stronger. Reflecting on their struggle, we can find parallels in our own challenges, both big and small. The story of the Clovis people reminds us that adversity can forge strength, and that survival often depends on unity, creativity, and the courage to face the unknown. Their triumph, subtle yet profound, echoes through time, leaving us with a mixture of awe, respect, and a reminder of our shared heritage. As we look back on this era of giants and peril, it is worth asking ourselves, what can we learn from the resilience of those who came before us? How might we apply their lessons of adaptation and cooperation to the world we face today? By observing and reflecting on these ancient struggles, we honor not only their survival, but also the enduring spirit that continues to define humanity.